Okay. Yeah, for those that haven't met me over the last couple of days, my name is Joel Blake. I'm a principal geologist with RTX. Happy to be here to present some work that we've been working on the last couple of years around the region, particularly on Devoncourt. I think most people are probably aware Rio have a long history in the region as our predecessor of CRA. And we had a bit of a hiatus, but we've been back in force in the last few years exploring the region. Mouse. There we go. Thank you. So thanks to Helen and the organising group for having me to present this. I also would be wrong to not thank the team of geoscientists and all our support staff that have contributed to the work that we're presenting today. And I'd also like to sort of thank the Calcadoon group and the McDonald family who have allowed us access to this project area for the last few years. Quick disclaimer, so Devoncourt is obviously still an early stage exploration project, and the results that I can present here are really for technical discussion purposes only. So RTX back in about 2018, 2019 became interested in the Wimberry granite for a few reasons. So you know, when you look at the magnetics on the regional map on the right here, you can see that it appears multi-phase. There's these bulbous stock-like phases surrounded by concentric rings that may represent more sill-like features, and they have an alternating magnetic character, as you can see. So Devoncourt itself is located in the center of one of these more stock-like phases. You know, why we like this area also, I guess, you know, at least in South Australia, granite has a precedence for being a good host for high-level IOCGs, and you know, when they crack, they tend to hold high interstitial pressure, which can help in focusing hydrothermal activity along localized structures. So, so the concept was that, you know, with the Wimberry, if granite emplacement spanned across a long period of time, you could potentially in this particular granite, you could have one of the earlier phases of the granite acting as the host, and a later phase being the source of the fluids. Interestingly to note that there's a few breccias and ironstones that we visited in the field, particularly on margins of these different phases. So, and the other source that we used was we visited the GSQ core library facility, and that was integral in really building up some evidence around the potential that the Wimberry granite had to host some mineralisation in it. So yeah, after reviewing a number of known mineral occurrences and in the Wimberry granite, we applied for a license covering two prominent magnetic anomalies in the centre of the Wimberry granite. Modelling suggested that there was about 200 metres of Georgina Basin cover over the top of these features, and we went ahead and completed some detailed ground gravity. So from that, there was a roughly coincident gravity anomaly with the eastern magnetic feature that we were interested in, and we drilled the first hole there in late 2019 and hit widespread IOCG style alteration and fairly low grade copper mineralisation. So on the right, here I'm showing the drilling to date. So the holes out to the west are on the the second magnetic anomaly. So we've drilled about 18 or so holes on the eastern feature at roughly 500-meter spacing. And the colours are from our core logging, which is a measure of infill percentage, which could be interpreted as the amount of brecciation. So the darker colours probably closely represent where we have a breccia phase, and the lighter colours represent a surrounding vein halo in the system. So drilling to date suggests that we've got a fairly subvertical breccia body, possibly northeast plunging, and it's marginal to the peak of the magnetics. The peak of the magnetics sits on the southwestern side of the body, and this is largely magnetite infill in a class supported breccia. Moving out in the system, there's strong K-feldspar alteration, particularly in the northeast, and that's present in wall rock alteration as well as breccia clasts. Further out, it's dominated by albite altered granite with some barite veining. So I won't go through the paragenesis on this slide in detail. I'd much rather sort of show you in some photos over the next few slides. I guess just to note at this point, the first four stages are most commonly seen as pervasive wall rock alteration in the granite, whereas the stages listed in blue are largely breccia infill and vein hosted. There is a final stage, which I'll talk about a little bit, which appears to be a retrograde oxidation stage in some parts of the prospect. So to the exciting bit, some photos of rocks. So we've got so covering the wall rock alteration that we see, we've got a chlorite alteration, which appears really early. We think it's even earlier than the albite alteration, and we're not really, we don't see it a lot because as most of the rocks in the region, they've had a strong albite event overprinting them. We also see pervasive sericite, which is probably something a bit different to some of the other IOCGs in the region. So that overprints the albite alteration, and then there's a locally pervasive K-feldspar alteration. This tends to be magnetic destructive, and we also see, we think related to this event, we see a lot of quartz dissolution, which is then later infilled by breccia and vein stage mineralogy. So in terms of some of the breccia and vein infill, predominantly we see magnetite quartz breccias with predominantly pyrite. That's the earliest stage. There's a secondary specular hematite phase that comes in after that, and then they're the most common phases that we see. And then the rest that I'm showing on the page are a lot less common. So we see later stages of probably lower temperature fluids giving off chlorite, carbonate breccias, barite, sometimes with nice fluorite, as you can see in the bottom middle photo, and then the supergene oxidation to hematite and some chalcocite. So in terms of mineralisation, we see different a complex sulfide story in the system. Again, predominantly it's pyrite, chalcopyrite associated with either the magnetite phase or the specular hematite phase. And then less commonly, we see other sulfide species in terms of with carbonate. So the top right example is in a big carbonate vein where you've got chalcopyrite, which looks to have precipitated and then been shattered and overprinted or infilled with bornite. We see a lot of disseminated chalcopyrite, particularly where we see strong potassic alteration. And again, that's in wall rock alteration as well as breccia clasts. The photo, pointer, sorry. Oh, okay, that's all right. The photo of the chlorite-rich breccia, this was encouraging intersect for us to sort of target more of this type of material. So it's effectively all chlorite in that matrix of the breccia, with pyrite and quite large class of bornite in that breccia. On a smaller scale in core, we see hematite intrusive breccias, which appear quite late in the system. And when you hit these with the PXRF, they have a really strong copper, uranium, and rare earth signature. But we haven't seen these in sizable amounts. And then rarely we see some what appears to be hypogene chalcocite. The other really interesting part of the story, so we are under 200 meters of cover, so you know, there was always a bit of excitement when we reached the basement, but there was a really interesting story about the unconformity. So the team, very early on, the team started to observe a lot of copper sulfides in the cover, in the Mount Burney beds. So the core stretch on the right-hand side has got the contact with the granite at the base there, and going up into a fining upward sequence to diamictites. It's a bit hard to see, but all the red circles there are visible sulfides. And in this case, you know, a lot of these are bornite. In other holes, we see some interesting relationships at the contact. So the larger photo there is a contact with the granite, where we've got fresh magnetite and fresh carbonate right at the contact with the Mount Burney beds, suggesting that, you know, that you've probably had a really rapid sedimentation, and with the lack of weathering that's there at the contact. It's important to note we don't always see the sulfides at the contact, but we also don't always see the conglomerate, the basal conglomerate, which tends to have more of the sulfides contained in them. So in terms of genetic model for the prospect, we think we've got a early granite fracturing by an iron sulfur rich fluid, which gives way to a magnetite dominant breccia unit that's breaking through. Later oxidized fluids with or potentially with the sericite acidic and or lower temperature fluids are coming in with the specular hematite, and then further oxidized fluids giving way to some late copper that probably overprints an earlier chalcopyrite phase with the second fluid there. So in terms of a summary and implications for our work going forward, we think we've got you know, these multi-mineral vein assemblages that we regularly see represent sort of reopening of the same structures during episodic hydrothermal fluid flow. The relatively low temperature potassium, iron, calcium alteration assemblages are representative of a relatively high level preservation or high level IOCG type system, comparative to other prospects in the region. And the retrograde oxidation represents the last hydrothermal event at Devoncourt, which is basically a late passage of really oxidized fluids. Still lots to learn about the system, I guess, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Joel. Do we have any questions from the floor? At least one.
Thanks, Joel. It's awesome talk. Great to see all that work. The diamictite observation, that's been seen in other places. And have you been thinking about using that as a opportunity to almost biopsy the cover, the base of cover, and then look for things like resistate minerals or other indicators that could target you into mineralization?
Yes.
I've got a question online from Karen Connors. She's interested in if there's any additional geochronology on the age range of the intrusive phases and the age of the mineralization.
Yep, dating back to I think it was 2019, we sponsored a student to do a lot more geochron. Obviously, in the cover, it's hard to get lots of samples. We don't have ages from the prospect itself that I can talk about, but certainly in the outcropping parts of the Wimburu, there was a UQ student who sampled a lot of the different phases and looked at some of the chemistry associated.